What if I told you that one image, a single, grainy photograph that no major outlet will officially confirm, has triggered one of the quietest but most intense reputation crises in the modern royal media war? Not a leaked tape, not a secret recording, not even a first-hand accusation. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Just an image, a rumor, and a name that was never supposed to be dragged into the spotlight. Because this time, the controversy doesn't center on Meghan Markle herself. It centers on her mother. And according to online speculation, whispered commentary, and a sudden resurgence of old claims, the timing of it all is not accidental. Ask yourself this: why would a decades-old allegation, one that was never conclusively proven, never publicly adjudicated, and never addressed on record, suddenly explode across forums, YouTube thumbnails, and comment sections right now? Why now? Why this week? Why just as certain books, interviews, and media narratives are colliding again? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, if none of it were true, why is there so much panic around controlling the narrative? Let's slow this down. Because this story doesn't begin with a mugshot. It doesn't begin with Tom Bower. And it certainly doesn't begin with Meghan Markle going insane, as some headlines dramatically claim. It begins with something far more dangerous: silence. For years, Doria Ragland has occupied a very specific position in the Meghan Markle story. She is present, but distant, visible, but carefully framed, spoken about, but rarely quoted, photographed, but never scrutinized in the same way other royal-adjacent figures have been. That alone is unusual. In the ecosystem of celebrity, especially royal-adjacent celebrity, the absence of information doesn't create calm. It creates a vacuum. And nature hates a vacuum. So does the internet. In that vacuum, speculation grows. Theories mutate. Old records, real, misread, or entirely fabricated, are passed around without context. Screenshots are reposted without sources. Names are matched without verification. And suddenly, what began as a question becomes, in the minds of many, a conclusion. That's how misinformation actually works. Not through one explosive lie, but through 1,000 small assumptions. Here's the shocking part. Most people sharing this story don't actually know what they're claiming. They haven't seen original documents. They haven't verified databases. They haven't checked whether names, dates, or jurisdictions even align. They're reacting emotionally. And emotion spreads faster than truth. Now layer on top of that a figure like Tom Bower, a man known not for making reckless accusations, but for something far more subtle: implication. Bower doesn't shout. He suggests. He doesn't accuse outright. He lays breadcrumbs, and he trusts the audience and the media to connect the dots themselves. That's why his work is so combustible. Because when he references background, family dynamics, or unexplored history, readers don't ask, "Is this proven?" They ask, "What aren't we being told?" And once that question is planted, it grows teeth. Online, that question morphed into something much darker. Claims began circulating that a mugshot existed. That Doria Ragland had been arrested in the 1990s. That charges involved drugs. That resisting arrest was part of the story. That records had been buried. That Meghan had hidden this past. Notice something important here. Every single one of those statements exists primarily in the realm of allegation. They are repeated, remixed, dramatized, but rarely sourced. And yet, the reaction to them has been anything but calm. Because according to multiple commentators and so-called insiders, this wasn't treated like a fringe rumor behind the scenes. It was treated like a threat. Let me ask you directly. If a claim is false, do you panic? Or do you dismiss it? If an image is fake, do you scramble to suppress it? Or do you laugh it off? Because here's where the story turns. Around the same time these allegations began circulating more aggressively, people noticed things disappearing. Posts deleted. Comments locked. Discussions shut down not with rebuttals, but with silence. And silence, in moments like these, doesn't feel neutral. It feels strategic. Now, before we go any further, let's be very clear about something. There is no confirmed public record that definitively proves the most extreme versions of these claims. No verified court documents have been produced. No mainstream outlet has authenticated the viral images. No on-the-record statement has acknowledged criminal wrongdoing. That matters. But here's what also matters. Reputation is not destroyed by court verdicts anymore. It's destroyed by suggestion, by repetition, by the lingering sense that something unresolved is being hidden just out of view. And that's why this story has teeth. Because it exists in the gray zone between fact and speculation, the most profitable, most volatile space in modern media. Think about it. Why do you think channels keep revisiting this topic? Why do thumbnails scream exposed instead of unproven? Why does outrage content outperform corrections every single time? Because audiences don't click on certainty. They click on suspicion. And Meghan Markle, fairly or unfairly, has become one of the most polarizing figures of our time. To her critics, every unanswered question is evidence. To her supporters, every allegation is an attack. And in the middle sits a woman, her mother, who never signed up to be the centerpiece of a global controversy. That tension is what makes this story so combustible. And according to multiple reports and interpretations, this particular rumor hit a nerve. Not because it was new, but because it struck at identity, family, origins, things that PR can't easily spin away. Sources claim that Meghan was furious. Others say she was terrified. Some insist she was calculated and cold, already planning the next move. Which version is true? That depends on who you ask. But here's what no one disputes. The response was not casual. And when people react strongly to something supposedly baseless, observers take notice. Now let's talk about timing again. Why would these claims resurface now, decades after the alleged events? Why not 5 years ago? Why not 10? The answer may lie in cycles. Media cycles, book cycles, legal cycles, attention cycles. Every time a new project, interview, or narrative pushes Meghan back into the spotlight, dormant controversies reawaken. Old grudges resurface. Forgotten threads are pulled loose. And sometimes, opportunists take advantage of that moment. They repackage old rumors as new evidence. They frame speculation as revelation. They let audiences do the rest. And once the algorithm smells blood, it doesn't let go. What happens next is predictable. People who already dislike Meghan lean in. People who already support her circle the wagons. Neutral observers are pulled into the chaos by sheer repetition. And Doria Ragland, a woman who has largely avoided public scrutiny, becomes a symbol, not of what is proven, but of what is implied. That's dangerous territory. Because once a person becomes a symbol, truth becomes secondary to narrative. And narratives don't need facts to survive. They only need momentum. Here's the contradiction at the heart of all this. Meghan has built much of her public identity around fighting misinformation, combating harmful narratives, and calling out media abuse. Yet now, she finds herself on the opposite side of a rumor mill that cannot be easily dismantled, because it isn't centralized. There is no single outlet to sue, no single journalist to rebut, no single article to correct, just thousands of voices repeating the same question. What are we not being told? That question alone has done more reputational damage than any confirmed fact ever could. And it brings us to the core of this series. This is not a story about proving guilt or innocence. It is a story about how allegations are born, how they spread, how they mutate, and how even the most powerful public figures can lose control of the narrative when speculation outpaces truth. Over the next sections, we are going to do something most commentary doesn't bother with. We are going to slow down. We are going to separate what is claimed from what is confirmed, what is rumored from what is documented, what is emotional from what is factual. We will examine where the mugshot story actually came from, how 1990s records are often misinterpreted, why name matches are not evidence, and how internet echo chambers transform uncertainty into conviction. And yes, we will also examine Meghan's alleged reaction, the strategic silences, the media's refusal to engage, and the people who benefit most from keeping this controversy alive. Because someone always benefits. The question is who? And more importantly, what happens when the next piece of this puzzle drops? Because according to those tracking this story closely, what surfaced online was only the beginning. What if I told you that a single image could be more powerful than pages of proof, years of interviews, or even sworn testimony? In the digital age, perception often outweighs reality. And nowhere is this more apparent than in the explosive life of rumors surrounding celebrities. And for Meghan Markle's family, it wasn't a leaked email, a private conversation, or an unsent letter that sparked the latest frenzy. it was a so-called mugshot. Imagine this. A grainy, black-and-white photograph of a woman you barely know. The background is stark, the expression neutral yet unsettling. There's a timestamp, a name, and suddenly, the internet decides it knows a story that history never recorded. That, in essence, is how unverified images operate. They provide a canvas upon which everyone can project their assumptions, fears, and judgments. So why are mugshots so potent? Psychology offers the answer. When we see a photo of a person in handcuffs, with the cold glare of a booking backdrop, the brain immediately assigns guilt. It doesn't matter if the charges are dropped, if the arrest was for something minor, or if the name was misattributed. The visual cue alone is enough to seed a narrative. And when that narrative aligns with existing biases, it becomes nearly unstoppable. Online, the story exploded. Forums lit up with threads dissecting every pixel, every shadow, every possible resemblance. Social media platforms became echo chambers, with users repeating claims like incantations. This proves it. Look at the eyes. Look at the posture. This is undeniable. The more people engaged, the more the rumor gained legitimacy, even though verification remained elusive. It's worth noting here that a mugshot, in isolation, is not evidence of guilt. Arrests happen for countless reasons, and charges can be dropped, records sealed, or mistakes made. Yet, the image became shorthand for a lifetime narrative. One photo, one rumor, had the power to rewrite public perception. That's the first paradox of digital rumors. Truth matters far less than impact. Let's break down the sequence of events as they reportedly unfolded. Sources claim that the photograph appeared first on a private forum, then spread to a niche blog, and finally exploded on mainstream social media channels. The timing coincided with renewed media interest in Meghan Markle's extended family, particularly her mother, Doria Ragland. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps it was the perfect storm for an old rumor to go viral. Think about the mechanics for a moment. Someone posts an image. No verification, no official documents, no corroborating sources. Yet it gets reposted, screenshotted, cropped, and captioned with increasingly dramatic text. Each iteration strips context, heightens emotion, and inflates speculation. In days, the image moves from obscure forum chatter to trending headlines in comment sections, YouTube thumbnails, and tabloid sites. This is how the unverified becomes unavoidably real in the public imagination. And this is precisely where the danger lies. Public figures are vulnerable not just to confirmed allegations, but to the rapid spread of unconfirmed claims. When repeated often enough, even a baseless image can alter perceptions, sow doubt, and influence behavior. Reputation, in the digital age, is fragile. Perception can be weaponized faster than truth can respond. Consider this analogy. Think of each rumor as a spark, and social media as a forest. One ember, an unverified image, lands in dry brush. People fan the flames with comments, shares, and speculation. Soon, it's a wildfire. Even if authorities eventually clarify the facts, the fire has already reshaped the landscape. That's the viral reality of mugshots online. Now, layer on the emotional stakes. Doria Ragland is not a public figure in the traditional sense. She is the private mother of someone globally scrutinized. Her life has largely remained quiet, measured, and intentionally shielded from headlines. That quiet, ironically, makes her an irresistible target for speculation. The absence of information doesn't create calm, it creates opportunity. And the reactions were swift. Channels across social media platforms speculated about Meghan's response, her inner circle strategy, and the potential impact on her family. Insiders allegedly claimed that the appearance of this image caused panic, triggering immediate discussions about controlling the narrative. Whether that panic was real, exaggerated, or entirely fabricated doesn't matter for the story's viral momentum. The perception of reaction itself became part of the narrative. It's important to note how repetition amplifies authority. When dozens, hundreds, or thousands of people share the same claim, the brain tends to equate volume with validity. Even absent proof, the rumor gains legitimacy simply because it is widespread. This is the principle at work with the so-called mugshot. As the image traveled from forum to blog to video, viewers assumed its truth by default. But there's another layer to consider: the interplay between truth and implication. Tom Bower, known for investigative biographies, writes in a style that is deliberately suggestive. He presents facts, context, and family history, leaving gaps that readers instinctively fill. When a public figure is involved, gaps often get filled with the most dramatic, attention-grabbing possibilities. This is precisely how speculation about Doria Ragland's alleged past became intertwined with unverified imagery. Yet, despite the frenzy, a crucial point must be emphasized. There is no verified record linking the image definitively to her. The photograph exists only as a viral artifact, a meme in the form of a mugshot. Every claim surrounding it relies on assumptions, not confirmed evidence. But here's the uncomfortable truth: that distinction matters little to the human brain. Visual stimuli, combined with narrative framing, create conviction far faster than logical correction can counteract. Now, consider the broader implications. Social media algorithms prioritize engagement. Controversy generates clicks, likes, comments, and shares. Outrage is rewarded. Content that evokes strong emotional reactions, fear, disgust, disbelief, performs far better than calm analysis. So even as fact-checkers issue cautions, the rumor gains traction because it triggers reaction, not reason. Which brings us to a core tension in this story: perception versus reality. For the public, the image and the surrounding speculation are now real in their minds. For Meghan Markle, for Doria Ragland, and for those aware of the truth, the situation is profoundly different. And the clash between perception and reality sets the stage for the unfolding drama. At this point, the question isn't whether the mugshot proves anything. The question is how such an image could disrupt carefully constructed narratives, influence public sentiment, and force a reaction from individuals who have long controlled their privacy. And yet, despite the high stakes, a paradox emerges. The very act of controlling the narrative can amplify the rumor. Silence, deletion, and avoidance are all interpreted as confirmation in the court of public opinion. In this case, reports suggest that attempts to manage the story internally were closely watched, dissected, and reported by secondary sources, each interpretation adding fuel to the rumor fire. So here's the takeaway: the unverified mugshot is more than just a photo. It is a catalyst, a symbol, a digital weapon that operates in the gray zone between reality and perception. And in the story we are about to unfold, it becomes the spark that ignites a series of events, reactions, and media cycles that will shape public perception for weeks, months, or even years. But what comes next isn't just about a photograph or a rumor. It's about the people interpreting it, the authors, the commentators, the insiders, and how their interpretations collide with public fascination, media incentive structures, and the fragile reputations of those involved. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. When it comes to controversy, Tom Bower has perfected a unique skill. He doesn't shout, he insinuates. He doesn't accuse, he suggests. And in doing so, he occupies one of the most combustible spaces in modern media, a space where facts, implications, and audience imagination collide in unpredictable ways. To understand the current maelstrom surrounding Meghan Markle and the rumored past of her mother, Doria Ragland, we first need to unpack exactly how Bower's writing style operates and why it's so effective at stirring speculation. Imagine reading a biography where every fact is meticulously sourced, every event carefully framed, yet certain sentences are crafted to create a question in your mind. Why did this happen, you ask yourself? Why wasn't this mentioned elsewhere? That's the Bower method. He leaves gaps, not by accident, but deliberately, because in those gaps, audiences do the work. They supply their own interpretations, often more sensational than what actually occurred. For decades, Bower has written about high-profile figures with surgical precision. His research is exhaustive, his citations extensive. But here's the subtle brilliance: the conclusions are rarely overt. He knows that speculation does not spread because someone reads a footnote. It spreads because someone imagines what the footnote might imply. And when the public projects assumptions onto a partially documented story, the result is an explosive, self-reinforcing rumor cycle. In the case of Meghan Markle, Bower's recent commentary allegedly included several references to family background upbringing, and influences that shaped her early life. These references, when removed from the context of the full narrative, were interpreted online as hidden truths about Doria Ragland's past. People connected dots that Bauer himself never drew, creating a narrative that seemed damning but lacked concrete evidence. Think about this carefully. When a respected author hints at a history that has never been verified, audiences tend to take it seriously. They assume that if a professional writer included it in a book, there must be a kernel of truth. That assumption is powerful because it bypasses skepticism. It doesn't matter if Bauer included it as mere context or anecdotal recollection. The audience fills in the blanks with certainty. Now, let's explore the anatomy of implication. A single line mentioning troubled times or past difficulties can be transformed into a headline that screams scandal. A vague mention of legal issues can be interpreted as a criminal record. And if the audience adds their own pre-existing biases about celebrity culture, race, and family, the rumor grows exponentially. This is exactly what happened with the alleged claims about Doria Ragland. Bauer's reputation amplifies the effect. His past works have been lauded for thoroughness, and many readers assume that everything he writes is verified fact. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. Insinuation becomes perceived evidence. The unverified mugshot, when coupled with Bauer's suggestive narrative, gained legitimacy in the eyes of the public. Suddenly, what began as subtle hints transformed into widespread belief, even though no primary documentation confirmed the most serious allegations. There's another layer to consider. Timing. Bauer's books often release alongside media cycles designed to maximize impact. Interviews, press appearances, and social media mentions coincide with moments when the public is already attentive to a subject. When speculation about Meghan's family resurfaced online, it aligned perfectly with renewed interest in Bauer's commentary. The coincidence made the rumor feel timely, relevant, and urgent, qualities that make viral content irresistible. Audience psychology also plays a role. Humans are naturally drawn to stories that suggest hidden knowledge. We feel smarter when we believe we've uncovered a secret. In this case, people who saw the alleged mugshot and linked it to Bauer's text felt like they were in the know. Sharing it reinforced social bonds and boosted status within online communities. The rumor didn't spread because it was true. It spread because it satisfied a psychological craving for insider knowledge. Bauer's method also exploits the tension between certainty and uncertainty. He provides fragments of fact within a framework that encourages interpretation. This combination is irresistible in an age where clicks and attention govern discourse. People want to believe they've discovered the truth hidden beneath layers of subtle narrative. They want to feel like they've decoded the insinuation. And that desire, above all else, drives virality. But the danger is obvious. When insinuation masquerades as revelation, it can inflict real harm. The subject of the speculation, in this case, Doria Ragland, is thrust into public scrutiny without due process or verification. The audience, convinced by implication rather than evidence, becomes a jury. And in today's media ecosystem, perception often outweighs fact, creating consequences that can linger for years. Let's pause and reflect on Meghan Markle's position in all this. Bauer's commentary does not target her directly in most instances. It discusses context, history, and family influences. Yet, because she is the global focal point of the narrative, any suggestion about her family is immediately interpreted as a reflection on her. This is the unspoken reality of celebrity scrutiny. Associations are as powerful as actions, and insinuation can feel like accusation. This is also where narrative friction occurs. Sources claim that Meghan's inner circle reacted swiftly when rumors began gaining traction. According to reports, what makes Bauer's insinuations so challenging is that they are not false in a provable sense. They are deliberately ambiguous. There's no single claim to refute, no clear-cut lie to expose. Instead, the narrative spreads because of ambiguity, and ambiguity is incredibly difficult to combat. Attempting to correct it often only draws more attention, a phenomenon media analysts call the Streisand effect. We also need to consider the broader media ecosystem. Bauer's books are meticulously documented and widely distributed, giving him a form of credibility that makes insinuations especially potent. When a respected author suggests history exists that has not been previously publicized, outlets covering the story are put in a difficult position. Reporters are hesitant to outright deny claims associated with a published work, particularly one that is legally vetted. This hesitation allows speculation to thrive unchallenged, which, in turn, fuels viral dissemination. Let's not forget social media's role. Platforms reward engagement, and nothing drives engagement like controversy, secrecy, or scandal. The unverified mugshot, combined with Bauer's subtle framing, became ideal clickbait. Viewers share, comment, and debate, often without pausing to ask whether the underlying facts are verified. Each share amplifies reach and reinforces perception, regardless of reality. Here's the final key point about Bauer's style. He trusts the audience to connect the dots. He rarely explicitly states conclusions, and that's what makes his work particularly dangerous in viral contexts. The audience fills in gaps with assumptions, often leaning toward the most sensational interpretation. In this case, the combination of Bauer's insinuation and the viral image created a feedback loop. Speculation validated the photograph, and the photograph reinforced speculation. Neither needed confirmation to gain power. And so, we arrive at the cliffhanger of this chapter, the question that sets the tone for everything to come. If insinuation can spread faster than verification, and perception can outweigh evidence, what happens when those involved, the subjects of the rumor, try to regain control? How do you respond when the world has already drawn conclusions based on suggestion rather than fact? The answer is not simple, and it is not immediate. What comes next involves strategies, reactions, and decisions that will ripple through media cycles, personal relationships, and public perception. And in the next chapter, we'll explore Meghan Markle's approach to reputation management. How someone in the global spotlight attempts to navigate an environment where insinuation can feel more damaging than accusation, and silence itself becomes a statement. Imagine being one of the most scrutinized people on the planet, constantly in the crosshairs of tabloids, social media, and global audiences who believe they know you, even when they don't. Now imagine that the latest rumor doesn't target your actions, your words, or even your career. It targets the most private member of your family, your mother. That is the scenario Meghan Markle allegedly faced when whispers of Doria Ragland's alleged past resurfaced online, fueled by insinuation, unverified images, and viral speculation. And for someone who has spent years carefully curating her public persona, controlling this kind of narrative is a high-stakes, near-impossible task. Reputation management, especially for Meghan, has always been a delicate balancing act. On one hand, she must maintain the authenticity that has endeared her to supporters, her voice in charitable causes, her advocacy for women's rights, her openness about mental health struggles. On the other, she must navigate relentless media scrutiny, misinformation, and the occasional targeted smear. Every statement, every social media post, every public appearance is analyzed, deconstructed, and sometimes weaponized. In this environment, even silence can be interpreted in multiple ways. So how does someone like Meghan Markle fight a rumor that targets her family, especially when the rumor itself is constructed on implication rather than evidence? The answer lies in a combination of PR strategy, selective disclosure, and timing. But let's be honest, even the most sophisticated strategy can falter when the rumor is emotionally charged, visually compelling, and circulating across millions of devices. First, consider the emotional dimension. When allegations involve family members, parents, siblings, partners, the stakes are inherently higher. It's not just about managing public perception, it's about protecting loved ones. According to multiple reports, Meghan's inner circle was reportedly alarmed by the viral claims surrounding her mother. Some sources describe a flurry of private discussions, emergency meetings, and strategic calls aimed at controlling the story. Panic, outrage, and fear reportedly mixed with calculated planning. The emotional intensity of the situation cannot be overstated. It's one thing to manage a personal scandal, and quite another to defend a parent from potentially life-altering false narratives. At the same time, Meghan's approach to public relations has always leaned toward proactive management rather than reactive confrontation. She understands that reacting too aggressively can amplify a story. This is the Streisand effect in action. The more you try to suppress something, the more attention it attracts. Therefore, in situations like this, silence or carefully worded responses are often preferred over outright denial. But as we've seen in past media cycles, silence can also be interpreted as guilt or confirmation, especially when paired with a viral image that is emotionally charged. This creates a paradox. Responding can escalate the story, while not responding can be equally damaging. Another tool in reputation control is narrative framing. Meghan has consistently framed herself as someone who overcomes adversity, advocates for truth, and maintains dignity in the face of scrutiny. Any statement or action in the context of this rumor would likely be measured to align with that broader narrative. It's about crafting a story where response doesn't just counteract the rumor, it reinforces her existing public identity. In other words, every action must be consistent with the persona that has been carefully cultivated over years. Yet even the most meticulous framing faces challenges when rumors spread with visual impact. The alleged mugshot of Doria Ragland is particularly potent because it bypasses narrative entirely. A photograph, especially one presented in the context of scandal, evokes immediate emotional reactions. Images stick in the mind, while nuanced explanations are often ignored. This visual element shifts the battle from words to perception, a far more difficult terrain to navigate. Audience psychology plays a crucial role here. Social media users are drawn to scandal for both entertainment and validation. Sharing a secret or unverified image can create a sense of insider knowledge. Commenting, reposting, and reacting allows people to feel as though they are part of an unfolding story. For Meghan, controlling this dynamic is nearly impossible. No statement can reach every viewer, and no clarification can counteract the emotional pull of the image itself. Timing also compounds the difficulty. Rumors rarely appear in isolation. They coincide with media cycles, book releases, and public appearances. Sources indicate that Bauer's commentary resurfaced at a moment when interest in Meghan's extended family was already heightened, creating a perfect storm for virality. In such a context, even carefully calculated responses may lag behind the speed of information or misinformation circulating online. Yet reputation control isn't just about reaction, it's also about preemptive strategy. Meghan has historically used controlled narratives to shape public perception. Interviews with select journalists, well-timed op-eds, and appearances designed to reinforce specific aspects of her persona. In the face of rumors about her mother, similar preemptive strategies likely came into play. This includes leveraging allies in media, carefully curating public appearances, and emphasizing personal and family achievements that counterbalance negative speculation. There's also a legal dimension to consider. Unverified allegations can cross into defamation, and attorneys often advise on how to address such claims without inadvertently confirming them. In situations where the alleged claims are based on insinuation, legal advice becomes both more complicated and more critical. Responding inappropriately could create liability, while inaction allows the rumor to continue unchecked. It's a high-stakes balancing act, and sources suggest that Meghan's team approached it with extreme caution. Despite all these strategies, there is an unavoidable reality. Reputation is not just controlled by the individual. It is shaped by the audience, the media, and the rumor ecosystem. Even with a proactive approach, Meghan could not entirely prevent speculation from spreading, nor could she dictate how every viewer interprets the images and insinuations circulating online. The public operates according to its own biases, assumptions, and emotional responses, which are often impervious to careful messaging. This is precisely why the alleged leak of the mugshot was so destabilizing. It bypassed messaging and strategy, appealing directly to emotion, confirmation bias, and curiosity. In the hierarchy of reputation threats, visual rumor can often be more damaging than written accusation because it leaves less room for explanation, context, or mitigation. Finally, we must acknowledge the human element. Meghan, like anyone else, is subject to emotional reactions. Reports of panic, frustration, or strategic calculation may be exaggerated, but they underscore an essential truth. Controlling reputation under intense public scrutiny is both exhausting and relentless. Every rumor becomes a test of judgment, endurance, and resilience. In this case, the stakes were personal, familial, and global simultaneously, a trifecta that magnifies stress and complicates decision-making. And so, the stage is set for the next phase of our story. The person at the center of the rumor, Doria Ragland, who has long remained private and protected, suddenly finds herself caught in a media maelstrom. The very strategies that Meghan employs to protect herself now extend to her mother, creating new layers of tension, vulnerability, and intrigue. But what happens when the strategies fail to contain the narrative? When the rumor spreads faster than any carefully planned response? When silence is misinterpreted as guilt, and every action is scrutinized under a global lens? The answer lies in the next chapter, where we examine Doria Ragland's position in the controversy, the dynamics of privacy, and the unintended consequences of being thrust into public view. Imagine living your life largely out of the public eye, quietly raising a family, maintaining personal and professional boundaries, and suddenly finding yourself at the center of global attention. Not for your accomplishments, but for allegations you never authorized to be shared. That is allegedly the position Doria Ragland found herself in when rumors about her past began circulating online, fueled by insinuations, viral images, and widespread speculation. She is, by all accounts, one of the most private figures in Meghan Markle's orbit, and yet the circumstances surrounding this controversy forced her into the spotlight, whether she wanted it or not. Doria Ragland's life before the media frenzy was characterized by careful privacy. Unlike her famous daughter, she rarely appears in public, speaks to the press, or engages with the media. Her presence is most often seen at significant life events, weddings, family gatherings, or charitable appearances, but she generally avoids scrutiny. That in itself makes her an anomaly in a culture obsessed with celebrity. Privacy, ironically, becomes dangerous when curiosity is abundant. The paradox is simple. The quieter you are, the louder speculation becomes. Absence invites questions. When people cannot find official statements, images, or detailed biographies, they fill the gaps themselves. And in the age of social media, those gaps become fertile ground for rumor, conjecture, and misinformation. The alleged mugshot of Doria Ragland is a perfect example. Because there was little publicly verified information about her personal history, the image carried more weight than it logically should have. Context was absent, yet assumptions were abundant. Moreover, Doria's role in Meghan's life made her an inevitable target. She is not merely a background figure. She is a mother, a supporter, and a key emotional anchor. Allegations about her past were, by association, interpreted as reflecting on Meghan herself. This is a recurring pattern in celebrity culture. Family members of public figures often bear scrutiny by default, and in extreme cases, they become symbols in narratives they never chose to inhabit. Let's examine how this dynamic intensified the situation. When the alleged mugshot surfaced, online communities immediately attempted to verify, debate, and interpret it. Some asserted it was authentic, while others suggested it was a case of mistaken identity or outright fabrication. The uncertainty itself was enough to generate conversation, engagement, and virality. What matters in these scenarios is not factual accuracy. It is the emotional response and the perceived relevance to a larger story. Sources suggest that Doria herself, like many private individuals suddenly thrust into the media spotlight, would have had limited avenues to respond. Unlike her daughter, she does not have a well-established platform for public messaging. Attempts to correct misinformation could inadvertently amplify the story, creating a phenomenon known as the Streisand effect. In other words, even if she wanted to defend herself, every public statement risked spreading the rumor further. The act of defending could become part of the narrative, blurring the line between truth and perception. The emotional toll of such exposure cannot be overstated. Even with a protective support system, the experience of having one's personal history dissected and questioned in a global arena is destabilizing. Privacy, once lost, is difficult to reclaim. For Doria, the very nature of her life, quiet, understated, removed from media spectacle, became an obstacle in mitigating the rumor's impact. Her lack of public visibility, which had been a protective asset, was now a liability in the court of public opinion. This situation also illustrates a broader truth about the digital age. Vulnerability is amplified. People who intentionally maintain low profiles are often unprepared for the velocity and scale at which rumors can spread. Images, words, and insinuations travel faster than official records, legal documents, or personal explanations. The perceived authenticity of an image, especially one that evokes strong emotional reactions, can outweigh the lack of evidence. This dynamic makes private figures particularly susceptible to reputational damage, regardless of the veracity of the claims. At the same time, Doria's case highlights the ethical dilemma inherent in viral media. How do you balance public curiosity with individual privacy? When a name surfaces in association with an allegation, particularly one that is unverified, journalists, commentators, and online users face a choice: investigate responsibly or exploit for engagement. In this controversy, the scale tipped toward exploitation. Headlines, thumbnail images, and social media threads prioritized clicks over context, speculation over verification. The result: a private individual caught in a narrative storm she did not create. But there's another layer to consider: the psychological impact of being framed as a symbol. In this narrative, Doria Ragland was not merely an individual with a history. She became emblematic of broader themes: family, lineage, identity, and the vulnerabilities of public life. Allegations about her past, whether true, false, or ambiguous, were interpreted as reflective of the larger story about Meghan Markle, her upbringing, and the challenges of being in the royal spotlight. This symbolic weight increases the stakes exponentially. Mistaken or exaggerated perceptions of Doria's past could influence the public's perception of Meghan, the royal family, and even broader conversations about privacy and identity. Here's the critical takeaway: the controversy surrounding Doria Ragland was not driven solely by factual claims or legal history. It was propelled by perception, ambiguity, and emotional resonance. The alleged mugshot became a focal point precisely because Doria's life had been largely private. Her discretion, intended to shield her family, paradoxically made her more susceptible to speculation. Silence, which might have once protected her, now amplified the story. This is where Meghan's reputation management strategies intersect with her mother's situation. Allegedly, Meghan's team had to consider not only her own public image but also the implications for her mother. Every decision — what to say, what to withhold, how to frame statements — had to account for a complex matrix of relationships, media dynamics, and audience psychology. The challenge was immense: defending her mother without creating additional viral momentum, countering insinuation without amplifying it, and protecting family privacy in a space that thrives on exposure. The stakes were personal and public simultaneously. The alleged claims about Doria Ragland may have originated decades ago, but their resurgence in the digital age meant that history was no longer private. It was performative, interpreted, and dissected in real time. For someone who has maintained a life of quiet dignity, this sudden exposure can feel invasive, threatening, and destabilizing. And for Meghan, it was a moment of reckoning. How to protect the woman who raised her while navigating a media environment that rewards sensationalism above all else. Finally, it's crucial to recognize the broader implications of this scenario. Doria Ragland's experience is a case study in the vulnerabilities faced by private individuals in a hyper-connected, attention-driven world. It illustrates the delicate interplay between privacy, perception, and virality. It highlights the human cost of rumor proliferation and the ethical questions that arise when private history is weaponized for clicks, engagement, or storytelling. And it underscores a central theme of this series. In today's media ecosystem, implication can be as damaging as accusation, and perception can override fact. But what comes next is even more unsettling. Once a private figure has been thrust into the public eye through rumor and insinuation, the narrative rarely stops with the initial claim. Online communities, media outlets, and social platforms generate a cascade of interpretation, reaction, and amplification. The alleged mugshot and the surrounding speculation were only the beginning. What followed would challenge not only personal privacy, but also the mechanics of truth, perception, and influence in the digital era. And what came next would set the stage for an even more complicated and explosive chapter in the story. In the digital age, time does not always heal. Sometimes it magnifies. Events that occurred decades ago, moments that were once private, obscure, or forgotten, can suddenly re-emerge, reinterpreted and repurposed for public consumption. The alleged claims surrounding Doria Ragland's past illustrate this phenomenon perfectly. Incidents or records from the 1990s, whether fully documented or misunderstood, became explosive material in the 2020s, weaponized for clicks, outrage, and narrative momentum. But how does this transformation occur, and why do old records have such devastating power in modern media cycles? Let's start with the nature of records themselves. In the 1990s, public records, court filings, and arrest logs existed largely in physical or semi-digital forms. Accessing them required specific knowledge, bureaucratic navigation, and often legal clearance. These records were not designed to be viral content. They were administrative, procedural, and mundane. Yet in the hands of digital sleuths or opportunistic content creators, even the most innocuous document can be reframed as sensational. A date, a location, a name, any of these details can be selectively highlighted to construct a compelling, if misleading, story. Consider how ambiguity contributes to perception. A minor legal incident in the 1990s could be framed as a major scandal today if context is omitted. Arrests without convictions, charges that were dropped, or mistaken identity cases are all vulnerable to misinterpretation. And when these details surface alongside suggestive headlines or images, the audience is primed to assume the worst. The lack of context, often lost in the translation from decades-old record to viral content, is precisely what gives old documents modern power. Timing and coincidence amplify the effect. Records or references that once went unnoticed can be strategically highlighted to align with current media cycles. For example, a renewed interest in Meghan Markle due to a book release, interview, or social media controversy creates a fertile environment for old information to resurface. Suddenly, an event from 30 years ago becomes newsworthy, not because it has inherent significance, but because it intersects with present-day narratives and audience attention. Digital transformation plays a role as well. Court records, once confined to local offices or microfilm, are increasingly accessible online. Public databases, FOIA requests, and scanning projects have made it possible for anyone with an internet connection to locate historical filings. While access to these records might be intended for transparency, the reality is that selective interpretation can turn raw data into viral content. A single record, decontextualized and combined with speculation, becomes a weapon in the perception wars. The psychology of memory and narrative adds another layer. Audiences are prone to the availability heuristic. They judge the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind. If a mugshot, arrest record, or alleged incident is visually or narratively compelling, people are more likely to believe it reflects broader truths, even if it's a one-off event or inaccurately framed. In other words, the most sensational detail often eclipses context, nuance, and verification. Historical records also carry an aura of authority, whether justified or not. A court document, legal filing, or police blotter is assumed to be objective. This assumption creates a dangerous dynamic. Readers or viewers may conflate documentation with guilt or relevance. In Doria Ragland's case, alleged references to her past, whether fully substantiated or not, were treated as proof of wrongdoing simply because they were framed as historical records. In reality, the interpretation is as important, if not more so, than the source itself. There's also a performative element at play. When old records resurface in modern narratives, they are rarely presented neutrally. Titles, captions, and commentary frame the record in the most attention-grabbing way possible. A minor incident becomes scandalous, hidden, or explosive. The framing primes the audience to react emotionally rather than analytically. Anger, shock, or disbelief drives engagement far more effectively than calm consideration, creating a feedback loop that perpetuates the narrative regardless of factual accuracy. Misattribution is another frequent issue. Names are matched incorrectly, dates are misread, or locations are assumed to correspond to specific individuals without verification. In viral media, these errors are rarely corrected promptly. Once a narrative gains traction, the audience tends to cling to the first version encountered, a cognitive bias known as anchoring. Even subsequent clarifications often fail to reverse initial perceptions. This makes old records, real or imagined, extraordinarily potent in the viral ecosystem. But let's examine the emotional impact on those involved. For private individuals suddenly confronted with decades-old records or alleged incidents, the experience is jarring, invasive, and destabilizing. Privacy, once presumed, is obliterated by the viral amplification of historical information. For someone like Doria Ragland, whose life had been quiet and removed from public scrutiny, the resurfacing of alleged 1990s events creates not just reputational risk, but psychological strain. Defending oneself against claims rooted in historical ambiguity is complicated, exhausting, and emotionally draining. Strategically, those in Meghan Markle's circle would need to weigh every response carefully. Attempting to publicly refute historical allegations can amplify the story, giving it more attention than it would have otherwise received. Silence, on the other hand, risks misinterpretation as tacit acknowledgement. This creates a precarious balancing act, in which every decision carries consequences for both the individuals involved and their broader public perception. Finally, it's essential to recognize that old records are often revived not solely for their inherent interest, but because they intersect with ongoing narratives. In this case, the alleged 1990s incidents were positioned to reinforce a broader story about family background, upbringing, and influence. Even if the incidents themselves were minor or ambiguous, their interpretation within the current context created emotional resonance. They became tools in a story that extends far beyond the original events, a story shaped by perception, emotion, and viral momentum. And so, the stage is set for the next layer of this controversy: online communities, forums, and social media networks that thrive on speculation and interpretation. Once historical records are introduced into this ecosystem, they are amplified, remixed, and weaponized, creating a feedback loop that is difficult to contain. What comes next is the exploration of how these digital echo chambers transformed speculation into what felt like undeniable truth for millions, setting the stage for widespread reaction, engagement, and further complication. What came next would not just challenge perception. It would challenge control itself, leaving the individuals at the center struggling to contain a story that had taken on a life of its own. In the age of social media, truth is no longer a prerequisite for influence. Speculation, once whispered in small circles, now spreads at the speed of a click, a share, or a retweet. The controversy surrounding Doria Ragland and the alleged resurfacing of her past in the 1990s provides a perfect case study of how digital networks amplify ambiguity, transform rumor into perceived reality, and pressure public figures into reaction. But how exactly does speculation become belief in the digital era? And why does this cycle feel inescapable for those targeted? It begins with the mechanics of virality. Online platforms prioritize content that evokes strong emotional reactions: anger, shock, outrage, or fear. These reactions drive engagement, which algorithms interpret as relevance. As engagement grows, the content is amplified, reaching broader audiences who may never have encountered the original source. A single unverified image, a fragment of text, or a suggestive comment can snowball into a global phenomenon overnight. The alleged mugshot of Doria Ragland is a textbook example. Isolated, ambiguous, emotionally charged, and easily misinterpreted, it became fuel for a narrative that transcended fact-checking or verification. But virality alone doesn't explain belief. Human psychology is equally critical. Cognitive biases like confirmation bias and the availability heuristic play a huge role. People are predisposed to believe information that aligns with their pre-existing assumptions. In this context, audiences already familiar with the polarizing narratives surrounding Meghan Markle were primed to interpret any hint of family controversy as credible. The mere appearance of an image or insinuation, without context or proof, was enough to reinforce existing beliefs. In short, people tend to see what they expect to see. Social proof compounds the effect. When thousands of others share, comment, or like content, the impression of legitimacy grows. Online, engagement is often mistaken for credibility. The more visible a claim becomes, the more likely individuals are to accept it as true. In the case of Doria Ragland, repeated circulation of the alleged mugshot, paired with commentary suggesting historical legal issues, created the illusion of verification, even in the absence of concrete evidence. Once speculation gains social validation, disbelief becomes socially costly. Questioning the rumor can invite criticism, ridicule, or ostracism in online communities. Emotion-driven virality is another factor. Scandal triggers instinctive responses. Images and claims that evoke surprise, moral judgment, or curiosity are more likely to be shared without scrutiny. This is why the alleged mugshot was such a potent catalyst. It provided a visual anchor for the story, bypassing analytical thinking and appealing directly to emotion. Once emotion dominates, reason often recedes, making rational corrections less effective. Even later clarifications or denials struggle to counteract the initial emotional impression. Platforms themselves exacerbate the issue. Algorithms reward engagement, not truth. The faster content spreads, the more entrenched it becomes in collective perception. A rumor can cycle repeatedly through different audiences, each iteration adding new commentary, embellishment, or interpretation. This creates a feedback loop in which speculation seems self-evident. It doesn't matter whether the original source was verified, the narrative survives through repetition and amplification. For Doria Ragland and her family, this means a loss of narrative control before any fact-checking can take effect. Echo chambers intensify the phenomenon. Online communities often cluster around shared perspectives. In these spaces, skepticism is discouraged, and dissenting voices are ignored or attacked. Rumors gain momentum because the audience is predisposed to accept them. Once speculation achieves critical mass within an echo chamber, it becomes a form of collective belief, almost independent of evidence. In this environment, even neutral or cautious statements by Meghan Markle or her representatives risk being framed as defensive, deceptive, or complicit. Misinformation thrives on ambiguity. In Doria Ragland's case, there was no publicly confirmed evidence of criminality. Yet the lack of concrete refutation does not stop the rumor from spreading. In fact, ambiguity often increases engagement because audiences fill gaps with their own interpretations. Humans are natural storytellers. They prefer complete narratives, even if parts of the story are imagined. The alleged mugshot provided a visual prompt, and Bauer's suggestive commentary provided a textual prompt. Together, they created a powerful narrative scaffold for speculation to solidify into perceived truth. The role of influencers, media personalities, and content creators cannot be overlooked. Online, figures with large followings can magnify rumors exponentially. When they interpret or comment on ambiguous content, their authority lends perceived legitimacy to the claims. In the case of the alleged Doria Ragland mugshot, viral commentary across YouTube, forums, and social media accelerated belief formation, ensuring the story reached audiences far beyond those who might have independently questioned it. The emotional and social stakes for those at the center are immense. For Meghan Markle and Doria Ragland, the viral spread of speculation created pressure to respond strategically, protect personal privacy, and manage public perception simultaneously. Yet responding carries risks. Acknowledgement can be misread as admission, while silence can be misread as complicity. In essence, the very tools used to protect oneself in the digital age, careful messaging, legal consultation, and selective engagement, can paradoxically reinforce the perception of guilt when rumors are emotionally charged and visually anchored. Finally, the digital life cycle of rumor reveals a critical truth. In an environment where perception drives engagement, truth becomes subordinate. Allegations, insinuations, and unverified images can achieve permanence in public consciousness long before any verification occurs. For those targeted, this dynamic is not theoretical, it's lived experience. The alleged mugshot and the surrounding speculation were only the beginning of a cycle that, once started, becomes extraordinarily difficult to halt. And here lies the cliffhanger. If speculation can solidify into perceived truth with such speed and intensity, what options remain for those who wish to reclaim narrative control? How can private individuals defend themselves against a belief that is no longer anchored in evidence, but in emotion, repetition, and digital momentum? The answer begins to unfold in the next chapter, where we examine the first public responses, media strategy, and the subtle interplay between silence, denial, and amplified perception. When a rumor explodes online, the first few hours, or even minutes, can define the trajectory of the narrative. For Meghan Markle and her team, the alleged resurfacing of Doria Ragland's past, paired with the viral mugshot, represented a perfect storm, emotionally charged, visually compelling, and amplified by suggestive commentary. The initial responses, or the deliberate lack thereof, were a critical part of the unfolding drama. Imagine being in Meghan's position. You wake up to alerts, mentions, and messages from global media outlets. Social media is ablaze with speculation, some rooted in unverified images, others fueled by insinuations in recently published works. Every moment you remain silent risks interpretation. Every public statement risks amplification. It is a digital minefield, where even the smallest misstep can explode into a headline or trending topic. Reports suggest that Meghan's inner circle immediately convened to assess the situation. The first step, fact-finding. Determining the authenticity of the alleged mugshot, cross-referencing legal records, and evaluating the credibility of sources became the top priority. In an era where misinformation spreads faster than correction, having accurate information is essential before taking action. Yet gathering facts alone does not neutralize speculation. In fact, the slower the response, the more room there is for online communities to construct their own versions of events, often more dramatic than reality. Silence can be both a shield and a trap. On one hand, not commenting can prevent adding fuel to the viral fire. On the other, prolonged silence invites interpretation. People read meaning into absence, and speculation often fills the void. In Meghan's case, silence may have been a strategic choice, designed to buy time, verify facts, and plan a controlled response. But even carefully measured silence is not neutral. In the digital age, it is often perceived as a statement in itself.